Reviewing the papers for us today are the BBC's Stuart Hughes and leadership coach Sue Revell. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us. You've been through the online websites and the papers. Let's start with you, Sue. You're looking at the independent and GP appointments?
Yeah, good morning. It's an interesting story for me because I've been doing some work on this in Wales. But on Thursday, Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, announced that all NHS consultants should become virtual unless there was a compelling clinical reason otherwise.
And that's in England, yes?
That's in England, of course. I'm picking up on your earlier point. Unsurprising, therefore, that leading medical associations and doctors have expressed concerns. Those concerns are around missing problems, digital poverty, and the impact on patient relationships. And that whilst it has its place, it's in no way a wonder drug. So the article recognises the convenience for some patients to fit in appointments around busy schedules, but definitely notes the barrier to the elderly and the impoverished, and that less opportunity to pick up diagnosis usually detected in face-to-face consultations. As a former clinician, I would definitely say we should not underestimate the importance of rapport in primary care. Many health professionals will tell you that people really, what they really need to talk about is rarely the first thing they talk to their GP or health professional about. That comes from the patient relationship.
Interestingly, I was talking to a GP about this very thing on Friday night, actually, and they said, you cannot substitute that face-to-face contact. Some of this is great and it can definitely benefit, but the idea that every consultation would be done online was perhaps problematic.
Absolutely. Part of the menu, definitely the way forward, but not the only choice.
Stuart, bore da, good morning. You have been looking at the Sunday Telegraph and the Observer, and we're looking at lockdown, schools, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and a new term that's entering the coronavirus glossary in recent days, trade-offs. This emerging idea that if some parts of life are going to be able to reopen, then others may have to shut again. It's almost like a weighing scales, trying to keep those two sides in balance to keep COVID-19 in check. And the Sunday Telegraph's got details of what it says is one such trade-off, which it describes as radical. The Telegraph saying that one option put forward to the government is for a programme of enhanced or differential shielding, which would mean that elderly and medically vulnerable people, somewhere in the region of around 2 million people across the UK, it's estimated, they would be asked to remain at home as they have done throughout lockdown in order to allow the rest of the population to move around more freely, with a suggestion that those people who are particularly vulnerable may be allowed to have exclusive access to certain parts of life at certain times of the week. Reading this story, it does feel a little bit like a more nuanced and certainly a more controlled version of the herd immunity strategy that proved so controversial at the start of the pandemic. And it also sounds a little bit similar to the strategy that's been pursued in Sweden, which has never introduced full lockdown measures and has been much more free in its normal way of life than many other parts of Europe and the rest of the world. It's clear that what the government is trying to do is willing to do almost anything to ensure that schools are able to reopen in September, and it's worried that those plans may now be in jeopardy.
There's evidence. Sorry, to interrupt. This is again in England, right? Just to be clear.
In England, sorry, yes, to be clear, in England, and there's evidence of that school strategy in England in the Observer. It had a headline: "Now teachers sound alarm over plans to reopen schools." The Observer saying that the General Secretary of the NES UWT believes that the brakes being put on the easing of some of these lockdown measures puts the onus on the government to provide greater clarity about what it's going to mean for the reopening of schools in England in September. But the Mail on Sunday paints the teaching unions as the villains of the piece, as it has done a number of times throughout this pandemic. It publishes the thoughts of an anonymous maths teacher in the north of England who's resigned from the NAS UWT because of what she regards as intransigence over getting pupils back into the classrooms. And she says, it's time for us to say enough is enough and get back to doing our job. We're behaving as if we're working on the front line, and we're not.
Let's turn back to you then, Sue, and you are looking, if I'm right, at an opinion piece in The Guardian. Tell us a bit about that. What are they saying?
So it's headed up, women don't need to lean in like men need to lead more like women. And I think any woman listening who's been in a leadership role in the last few decades will have been through periods where it's been definitely advocated that women should act more like men if they want to get ahead. And this article is talking about the different types of leadership. Great continuity from your last speaker, James, because they quote women like Jacinda Ardern and Angela Merkel. And the World Economic Forum is now saying that being female-led has provided countries with an advantage in the current crisis. So whilst we only have 19 countries in the world that are led by women, the article's very fair that there are lots of awful women leaders too. The study was done by matching female-led countries with their closest neighbour based on socio-demographic and economic characteristics considered important in the transmission of the virus. And it does show that they've performed better, both fewer cases and fewer deaths. 2 suggestions are made. One is that women may be locked down earlier. Perhaps women are more risk averse in their leadership style, but also that women are more democratic and participative in their leadership style. So is it time where actually we shouldn't see behaviour as male or female, but simply that we suggest men start acting like women to be more successful?
Very interesting. Stuart, you're looking beyond Earth. You're looking at potentially life on Mars?
Yeah, indeed. A story in the Sunday Telegraph caught my eye because earlier this year I was supposed to be travelling to Utah to be part of a simulated mission to Mars with a crew of scientists in the desert, and that was put on hold because of coronavirus. But there is hopeful news for us that, who have an interest in Mars in the Sunday Telegraph. A space scientist, Professor Sanjeev Gupta from Imperial College London, tells the paper he believes the first human footprints could be on the red planet in 80 years. If that sounds far-fetched, 1,000 years ago, no one from outside New Zealand had set foot in that country, and no one had set foot in Antarctica until 100 years ago. So he says the vision of humans on Mars is technologically possible. I like this story because, during the pandemic, which has often felt so claustrophobic, I've been reading a lot about space missions to remind myself that there is a universe far beyond my own 4 walls. And I would love to think that Professor Gupta's 80-year timeline could be halved to give me a chance to see it in my own lifetime, to see men and women putting their feet on Mars in my lifetime. But even if it does turn out to be 80 years and beyond my lifespan, I think it's probably only a matter of time before that dusty surface of Mars has the first human footprints on it.
Can you imagine? Hey, thank you very much to both of you for joining us this morning. I'm afraid we have run out of time. That's the BBC's Stuart Hughes and leadership coach Sue Revell. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been Sunday Supplement. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But coming up after the news, all things considered.